We shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? I'll give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Last week, the Treasurer said that government spending was, quote, not a factor in last week's interest rate rise. However, on Friday, when asked, the Reserve Bank Governor said, quote, it's factual, it's not an opinion, it is not a judgment, it is a fact. That's all it is. Can the Prime Minister confirm that the RBA Governor is right and that the Treasurer is wrong?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Let's be very clear about what the RBA Governor has said. Last Tuesday, she was asked directly about government spending, and she said this: what's happened in the last 6 months or so, private demand has turned out to be much stronger than we have been forecasting. And then on Friday, the RBA Governor was asked about it again, and she said this, direct quote, public demand's contribution has declined, and we were surprised in the first half of 2025 that it declined as much as it did. And we were surprised in—
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. Because the member for Cook is yelling so much, I can't hear the direct quote the Prime Minister was talking about, that he was asked about. So if everyone could just cease their interjections. When you ask a question, and the Leader's entitled to her question, I think everyone needs to show a little more respect, including the member for Cook. Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And we were surprised in the latter half of 2025 that private demand on the upside. Then the killer three words, they are facts. And indeed they are facts from the RBA Governor. They are facts.
Order. The Minister for Infrastructure.
And we will keep focused on easing cost of living pressures, the measures that we have put in place, making medicines cheaper, investing in more bulk billing, investing in urgent care clinics, cutting student debt, paid prac $10,000 cash incentives for construction workers, income tax cuts. That always gets them upset, Mr Speaker. That always gets them upset. They opposed, and we're going to roll back our income tax cuts. And now, when the income tax cuts comes in on July 1, they'll be very depressed about that, Mr Speaker. And then when it happens next year, they'll be even more depressed about that, Mr Speaker. What drives us each and every day is making a positive difference to people's lives. We'll continue to do it, and no amount of verballing of the RBA Governor will change that.
Order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the honourable member for Cunningham.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. What were the outcomes from the Prime Minister's recent visit to Indonesia, and why are our relationships in the region and the world so important for Australians at home? How has the Albanese Labor government improved our relationships since coming to government?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Cunningham for her question, and indeed no country is more important to Australia or to the prosperity, security and stability of our region and the Indo-Pacific than Indonesia. Our bond of trust runs deep. We're neighbours, but we're also trusted partners and friends. We share a commitment to sovereignty, security and the pursuit of prosperity. And last Friday, along with President Prabowo, we took yet another step in furthering those goals, signing the Treaty of Jakarta 2026. It is a historic moment. The treaty looks to our shared future, but it's been shaped by 3 decades of shared history in defence cooperation dating back to the Keating-Suharto governments. Because Australia and Indonesia know that in 2026, just like in 1995, the way that we secure peace and stability in our region is by acting together. And that's why on Friday, further to signing the treaty, I announced a range of new defence cooperation measures between Australia and Indonesia, offering to establish a new position to embed a senior Indonesian defence officer in the Australian Defence Force, supporting the development of joint defence training facilities to increase Indonesia's ability to conduct joint exercises, including with Australia, and expanding military education exchanges to build relationships and increase understanding between our next generation of military leaders. Mr Speaker, there's no doubt that President Prabowo's affection for Australia is in part due to the time he spent not far from here in Duntroon. That's why these person-to-person relations really matter and really count. All of these measures strengthen our partnership based on trust, mutual respect and a commitment to sovereignty. But they also build on our broader engagement with our partners in the region. With PNG, and I spoke with Prime Minister Marape just last night, who very much welcomed the agreement between Australia and Indonesia, but also the agreements we've struck with Timor-Leste, with Nauru, Tuvalu and ASEAN. Those relationships are so important for Australia because the more that we work together, the more we fulfil our role as a middle power to drive consensus and respect for sovereignty, the more peaceful, secure and prosperous our nation and indeed our region will be.
The call to the member for Fowler.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, UNSW research shows Fowler has the highest level of rental stress in the country, with almost half of the renters in housing stress. Working renters in my community are being smashed by high rents and soaring bills, yet most are not eligible for rent assistance or other concessions, even though they do the right thing and pay their taxes. What specific new relief will your government deliver this year for the renters in South West Sydney who are above concession thresholds but still falling further behind?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Fowler for her question. The first thing we will do, of course, that the member for Fowler, I'm sure, is quite conscious of, because I think she voted for the tax cuts and welcomed them, is that tax cuts for every taxpayer, including every single taxpayer in the electorate of Fowler. Fowler has 65,000 taxpayers, and I can inform the member, and the average tax cut will be $2,160, or $42 every week, every single week. And that will be followed up next year by the same, another tax cut, again reducing that first marginal tax rate so that every taxpayer benefits, not just some. A big difference between our approach on this side and the approach that was taken by the former government. In addition to that, I can inform the member that 23,000 people in her electorate have got student debt relief. 23,000, making an enormous difference. In terms of the PBS co-payment reduction, over $5.5 million will be saved across 400,000 scripts in her electorate, making an enormous difference as well. In addition to that, something that was opposed by those opposite in various spots over there was the 60-day scripts policy. Now, over $2.5 million in savings has been made across 380,000 scripts of that. The Liverpool Medicare Urgent Care Clinic that's opened means that all people need is their Medicare card, those people who front it up, not their credit card. And I can inform the member that as of the 2nd of February, 14,900 of her constituents have been to that urgent care clinic, got the care that they need when they needed it efficiently, taking pressure off the emergency departments of hospitals. But of course, in addition to that, we have funded an upgrade at Fairfield Hospital as well, even though it's not our responsibility, it's the New South Wales Government's responsibility, we are rebuilding that hospital, making it better than ever, making an enormous difference. And as of the changes that we made on the 1st of November to have the tripling of the bulk billing incentive, 9 additional practices in that electorate have converted to be fully bulk billing, meaning a total of 83 practices have signed up to be Medicare bulk billing practices, making an enormous difference to cost of living in the members' electorate.
call to the honourable member for Tangney.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. What is the importance of the historic treaty between Australia and Indonesia signed last week? How will this strengthen Australia's relationship with our closest neighbours? Thank you.
The call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Well, can I thank the member for his question? On Friday, the Prime Minister and President Prabowo Subianto signed the Jakarta Treaty. The Jakarta Treaty obliges our two countries to consult with each other when faced with adverse challenges to our common security. And this is the first time that we are making this commitment to each other as two nations since the Security Treaty of 1995, which was signed by President Suharto and Prime Minister Keating. But additionally, the treaty signed on Friday commits our countries to leader-level consultations, and that, in combination with the Defence Cooperation Agreement, which I signed with my then-counterpart Minister Prabowo in 2024, an agreement which makes it much easier for our respective defence forces to operate from each other's territory and bases, means that the architecture between our two nations today is at a high watermark. And these statements of principle, this architecture, is being backed up with action. We are supporting training facilities in Indonesia, including at Morotai Island. And we're encouraging the Indonesian military to do more training in Australia. We're providing opportunities for senior military leaders in Indonesia to be embedded in the Australian Defence Force at a much more senior level. Now, this evening I will be speaking with my counterpart, Defence Minister Shafri Shamoden, to explore ways in which we can further these initiatives and look at other means by which we can deepen the bonds between our two defence forces. But when you take a step back and just look at the map, what is completely clear is that Indonesia and Australia should be the very best of friends, and now we absolutely are. Given the challenges that we face today, Indonesia is located in the most strategic area of interest for Australia, and we provide Indonesia with strategic depth. And this fundamental, mutually beneficial exchange is better understood between our two countries today than it has ever been, and it is underpinned by a level of trust which is as good today as it has ever been. Under the leadership of the Prime Minister, very much supported by the Foreign Minister, and the leadership of President Prabowo, Australia and Indonesia are now moving forward together in the world as the very closest of neighbours, as the very dearest of friends, and with a shared commitment of purpose and destiny.
Order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question goes to the Treasurer. Following last week's interest rate rise, respected
Order,
TV...
No, we're just going to pause. The member for Warren, I can't hear the question. So if both sides of the chamber can cease interjecting, and we'll reset, and the Deputy Leader will start his question again, just out of respect for him.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question goes to the Treasurer. Following last week's interest rate rise, respected TV finance guru Koshi sent a direct message to the Treasurer saying, and I quote, "Mate, you've got to tighten your belt. You've told all of us to tighten our belts to fight inflation. You didn't. And so you are responsible for this interest rate rise." The Treasurer has dismissed the views of scores of economists and now even the Reserve Bank Governor. Will he at least concede Koshi has a point?
Order. The member for Chifley will cease interjecting or he'll be warned. We'll hear from the Treasurer.
Mr Speaker, once again the Shadow Treasurer is being deliberately dishonest. The only people in this parliament verballing the Governor of the Reserve Bank sit over there.
we'll just get the Treasurer to pause because the manager will state his point of order.
Well, the Treasurer knows he's not allowed to make that inference in the House.
Yeah, I'll just get him to withdraw. He can make other claims, but he can't use the word deliberate.
Okay. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Once again, the Shadow Treasurer
Get the Treasurer
is...
to withdraw. Just to withdraw.
Oh, withdraw.
Thank you.
Once again, the Shadow Treasurer is being dishonest, Mr Speaker, and he interjects that I should apologise to the Governor. The only people in here verballing the Governor sit over there, Mr Speaker.
Order.
They sit over there, Mr Speaker. Now, I say this about the view that the Shadow Treasurer has quoted from David Koch. So I assume by his logic and by the Shadow Treasurer's logic, if the budget position is the sole determinant of inflation and interest rates, then I assume the Shadow Treasurer and the person he quoted, I assume they held the same view when inflation was coming down last year and interest rates were cut 3 times. But no, they didn't, Mr Speaker. And that exposes, I think, the hypocrisy of those opposite who pretend when inflation's coming down and interest rates are being cut, it has nothing to do with the government. But when inflation ticks up in the second half of the year and interest rates go up, all of a sudden it's 100% driven by the government's budget position.
Order.
Now, by the Shadow Treasurer's own logic then, Mr Speaker, if we pick up and run with the Shadow Treasurer's own logic, then the fact that they just took to the election a policy for bigger deficits and more debt means they are conceding that if they had won the election, inflation would be higher and interest rates would be higher as well. They can't have it both ways, Mr Speaker, in either respect. They can't say one thing about last year and another thing about this year. They can't say budgets are the primary determinant of prices in the economy only when inflation ticks up towards the end of last year. Now, Mr Speaker, I was also asked about
the Treasurer will pause. I was about to say what he was asked about, but I'll hear from the Deputy Leader.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It was on relevance. We've only got less than a minute to go. I'm flattered the Treasurer wants to keep talking about me, but he's not.
No, resume your seat. Don't abuse the standing orders by adding that flourish to the response. The Treasurer was saying he was asked about, and that's when you took the point of order, so it's pretty difficult. If he's going to directly answer the question or be directly relevant, I'll make sure he is.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was referring to the gentleman he quoted. I was referring to the Reserve Bank Governor, and that's why I was being relevant to his question. Now, Mr Speaker, as the Prime Minister reminded the House a moment ago, this was the view of the Reserve Bank Governor on Friday. Public demand's contribution has declined, and we were surprised in the first half of 2025 that it declined as much as it did. And we were surprised in the latter half of 2025 that private demand was on the upside. They are facts. That's what Governor Bullock actually said, Mr Speaker. Now, the more divided they get, the more dishonest and the more desperate they get, Mr Speaker, over there. I saw Senator Hume say this morning, Mr Speaker, that they had to reach for the rabbit, in her words. Well, here he is over there, Mr Speaker. That three-ring circus has already got a clown and now it's got a bunny as well, and they are the two reasons why nobody takes them seriously on the economy anymore.
Order. Give the call to the member for Swan.
My question is to the Minister for Resources. How is the Albanese Labor government working with our global trading partners and strengthening the global supply chain of critical minerals and creating secure jobs here in Australia? What is threatening Australia's critical minerals industry?
Call to the Minister for Northern Australia and the Minister for Resources.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Swan for her question, which goes to the heart of Australia's national interests. Last week I was in Washington DC, where I represented Australia at the Critical Minerals Ministerial convened by the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. 54 nations attended the ministerial gathering, and the message was clear. The world needs more reliable, more transparent and more resilient critical minerals supply chains, and no nation on earth is better placed to supply those minerals than Australia. The Albanese Labor government has stepped up to lead globally on critical minerals and rare earth supply chains. Since day one, this government has been focused on creating more well-paid, secure jobs for Australians. Since day one, this government has developed policies to ensure this nation makes the most of its natural resources advantages by developing a critical minerals industry. We have agreed a critical minerals and rare earths framework agreement with the US, the first country to do so. We have provided leadership by working with the US, the UK, Japan, Canada, Korea, the European Union and the G7+. Over 3.5 years, this united government has worked together to back that diplomacy with serious domestic policy. We have legislated production tax credits for processing critical minerals and rare earths. We have made a generational investment in geoscience. We have created the Critical Minerals Strategic Reserve. The result is that this government has made Australia an indispensable player in global discussions on critical minerals. Mr Speaker, Australia's strategic reserve is world-leading. Indeed, the US announced just last week its own critical minerals reserve in the $12 billion Project Vault. Our allies and partners around the world are following Australia's lead to develop secure supply chains in critical minerals. There is consensus everywhere, except over there. The on-again, off-again, on-again coalition, they oppose the strategic reserve, which the US is now implementing. They voted against production tax credits, and with absolutely no consultation, the member for Hume dismissed production tax credits for the resources industry less than an hour after it was announced by the Treasurer. That's some leadership style, and I'm sure it bodes well for future discussions with the colleagues. Mr Speaker, they are at odds with each other and they are at odds with the rest of the world. We should remember that when last in government, the coalition had 2 resources ministers, and now they are doing it again. We have an acting shadow resources minister over here, and we have a second resources shadow in the Sinbin. Hi, member for Wannon. It's good to see you back there again. Yeah, it's amazing. Now, Mr Speaker, they don't take themselves seriously. They don't take the resources sector seriously. All they do is take the resources sector for granted.
Call order. The call to the gentleman for Parkes. Parkes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Climate Change and Energy. Was the minister telling the truth when he promised Australians a $275 reduction in their power bills by 2025?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. The Minister has the call.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. We went to the 2022 election with a very clear policy, and we've been implementing that policy. And the Australian people endorsed that policy last year, knowing the challenges that we faced, in implementing the policy.
Order.
And I note that in New South Wales, in May 2022, the price of energy at a wholesale level was $320 a megawatt hour. And it's now $75 a megawatt hour. And those over there say, oh, wholesale prices. Well, if wholesale prices don't count, why did the member for Hume promise to make them $70 a megawatt hour? And to be fair to him, in full disclosure, he came nowhere near meeting that promise, to be fair, Mr Speaker, because when he left office they were $280 a megawatt hour. And I note that in New South Wales as well, 77,974 cheaper home batteries have been installed since the 1st of July, meaning those people have reduced their energy prices by up to 90%, by bills by up to 90%, which helps them, obviously, and helps the entire grid as well, reducing prices for everyone. And it played no small part, and they say, oh, rich people. Well, really, when 44% of cheaper home batteries that have been installed are in regional New South Wales, in regional Australia.
The Treasurer. Order. Look, I'm trying to hear the member for Page, member for Barker, member for Cook. Can just take it easy while I hear the member for Page.
Thank you, Speaker. The point of order is on relevance. Very tight question, which the minister refuses to answer.
The minister was asked pretty much a yes/no question, but as the member for Page knows that I'm not able to direct him to answer it the way that he would like, What I can do is make sure it's being directly relevant to the question he was asked about power bills, and I'm going to make sure it's being directly relevant to the information that he's providing with the House, but I appreciate Member Page would like him to answer it differently. I cannot deliver it on that wish for him today. The Minister has the call.
And, Mr Speaker, as well as the question, I was also referring to the interjection for those opposite who said there's rich people who are installing cheaper home batteries. Well, tell that to the questioner, who has, in the seat of Parks, 1,547 cheaper home batteries, or the person who took the point of order, the member for Page, who has 2,501 cheaper home batteries, and he's the lecturer. Are they rich people? It shows how out of touch those opposite are, Mr Speaker, those regional MPs opposite. Whether they are Liberals or Nationals or One Nation or prefer not to disclose, they are out of touch with their constituents.
Order. The temperature was the interjections were way too high during that answer. I do not want to see a repeat performance of that. I'd like to hear from the member for Hughes.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What steps is the Albanese Labor government taking to strengthen the budget and support Australians with the cost of living? How does that compare with other approaches?
Give a call to the Treasurer.
Thanks to the member for Hughes for his question and for the really important contribution that he's already making to our team in this place. Mr Speaker, this government is improving the budget position at the same time as we're helping with the cost of living by cutting taxes for all 14 million Australian taxpayers in the tax system a second and third time this term. Now, these are the big differences between a government which is delivering tax cuts and that shambolic three-ring circus over there, Mr Speaker. Now, don't forget the highest taxing government in recent decades was the Howard government. The highest spending government in recent decades was the Morrison government. And those opposite went to the election with a policy for higher taxes, bigger deficits and more debt. Now, Mr Speaker, the Shadow Treasurer a moment ago asked about tightening the belt. Mr Speaker, he wouldn't know the first thing about responsible economic management. They failed every year to deliver a surplus, and we've already delivered two. They had real spending growth at 4.1%. We've got it down to 1.7%. They were spending almost a third of the economy. We got it down closer to a quarter. They spent most of the upward revisions to revenue. We have saved most of them. We got their debt down by $176 billion, partly by saving $114 billion, including $20 billion in the most recent update in December, which improved the budget position in every single year of the forward estimates. Mr Speaker, this is an important part of the biggest nominal improvement in the budget in our history, allowing us to make room for key investments in areas like Medicare, Mr Speaker. Now, there's more work to do, but the substantial progress that we've made has come from savings, spending restraint and surpluses that those opposite were incapable of. We won't be taking lectures from them on the budget or on taxes. They might change their leader this week, but they can't change their record, Mr Speaker. Now, at the same time as we got the budget in better nick, we're cutting income taxes so more people can earn more and keep more of what they earn. This means lower taxes for workers and lower average tax rates in the economy, a big part of our effort to rebuild incomes after the deliberate wage stagnation we saw under those opposite, Mr Speaker. Now, we know that there is more work to do in the budget because people are still under pressure and the budget is under pressure as well. But it would be under more pressure and people would be under more pressure if those opposite were implementing their election policies for higher taxes, bigger deficits and more debt. And for that, Mr Speaker, the member for Hume and the member for Fairfax have to take responsibility for that. They are among the two biggest reasons why nobody takes them seriously on the economy anymore.
The Leader of the Opposition now has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that interest rates have gone up 13 times on his watch and that the average mortgage holder is now paying $23,000 more every year in repayments?
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Leader of the Opposition for her question. And what I can confirm is that when we came to office, inflation had a 6 in front of it and was rising. It now has a 3 in front of it. And one of the things that we have managed to do through the responsible economic management that we have put in place is to get inflation heading down at the same time as we have kept unemployment low, at the same time as we have seen real wages increase over the last 2 years. So that is what a responsible Labor government does, make sure that we understand cost of living pressures, make sure that we understand the need to get inflation down, which is why it led to that decrease in inflation, led to 3 interest rate decreases last year. And of course, we have seen an uptick in inflation. As we have acknowledged, the work continues to do, and the Reserve Bank Governor made it clear.
Well, the Prime Minister was just talking about interest rates and what's happened to those, which we was asked about. So I'll take the point of order from the Leader of the Opposition, but it's going to be hard to make it on relevance.
Indeed, the Prime Minister was, Mr Speaker. My point of order is on relevance because it was a very straightforward question with 2 simple data points. Have interest rates gone up 13 times? Is the average mortgage holder now paying $23,000 more a year?
I thank the Leader of the Opposition. As I was explaining, he was referencing one of those data points that you referred to in his answer. So it may not be the answer you like, but he was definitely talking about the interest rates. So under the standing orders, he's being directly relevant.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And after the last meeting of the Reserve Bank, which independently sets interest rates, this is what the Governor had to say. What's happened in the last 6 months or so, private demand has turned out to be much stronger than we have been forecasting. That is what the Reserve Bank Governor had to say very clearly. But what we have done is to make sure as well that we have provided for cost of living support, something opposed by those opposite, who only have the same, whose energy for opposing our cost of living measures is only exceeded by the energy we're fighting each other.
Order. 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 The member for Herbert. When the House comes to order, the member for Gippsland, we won't. Order. Now that the House is order, we will hear from the member for Dickson.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government—
No, order. The member will pause. Just like we did before for the Deputy Leader, we're going to have silence. We did it for the Deputy Leader, now we're going to do it for the member for Dickson. She's earned the right to be heard in silence as well. The member for Dickson will begin her question. We'll hear it in silence, and then question time will continue.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering more choice, lower costs and better health care for Australian women after a decade of cuts and neglect?
Call to the Minister for Health and Ageing, the Minister for Disability and the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you to my friend the member for Dickson for the question, but also for joining us in the Mural Hall this morning with the Minister for Women, the Assistant Minister for Health and so many others of our colleagues. She is one of a record 69 women who sit in the government party room, and every single one of them regularly remind me you can't be serious about strengthening Medicare without being serious about strengthening women's health, because, of course, women consume about 60% of all health services, often not because they're sick, but because they're women, taking responsibility for their own and for their families' reproductive health and planning, or because they're going through menopause or perimenopause. And the truth is, Mr Speaker, women spent decades in this country simply not getting the support that they needed and that they deserved. No new contraceptive listed on the PBS for more than 30 years. No new menopause treatment listed on the PBS for more than 20 years. No new endometriosis medicine for more than 30 years. Not because they didn't exist, but forcing Australian women to pay top dollar for the best medicine on the market. Well, this government changed that, Mr Speaker, with a landmark women's health package that we announced 1 year ago today. And I want to pay credit to the Assistant Minister for Social Services, who crafted that package, and to the Assistant Minister for Health, who has spent the last several months implementing it, because this package has made a real difference to Australian women. More than 660,000 women have filled 2 million scripts for new medicines we listed on the PBS, saving them tens and tens of millions of dollars after decades of inaction. Every primary health network now has a dedicated endometriosis and pelvic pain clinic, either open or due to open over the next several weeks. More than 70,000 women have used the new Medicare menopause assessment since just July, and thousands of women have used bulk bill visits to access long-acting contraceptives like IUDs or implants without having to pay the hundreds and hundreds of dollars they had to pay for that service before the 1st of November. Mr Speaker, for too long, Australian women were getting shortchanged by our healthcare system. Not enough attention to keeping the PBS updated, not enough support during phases like menopause and perimenopause, and too often, frankly, being expected simply to suck it up with conditions like endometriosis and pelvic pain. Well, this package has already gone a long way to righting those wrongs, Mr Speaker, and making sure that Australia's women reap the benefits from a stronger Medicare.
Call to the honourable member for Hinkler.
Mr Speaker, and my question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Can the minister name a single Australian who has received the $275 reduction in their power bills by the end of 2025, as promised by the Albanese government?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Mr Speaker, I can name 225,531 Australian households that have reduced their bills to zero, Mr Speaker, with a cheaper home battery. And I can name every single Australian household that's seen their energy prices at a wholesale level fall by 44% in the last quarter, thanks to record renewable rates that have been introduced by this government's policies after a decade of denial and delay, after the member for Hume presided over 4 gigawatts of dispatchable power leaving the grid and only 1 gigawatt coming on, which was a tailor-made energy crisis in this country.
Thank you, Zan. Order. Order. Just remind the minister he doesn't need to use a loud voice. I can definitely hear him when he's addressing the House. Order. We'll now hear from the honourable member for Macon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government reforming the defence estate? What has been the response to this? And how does this compare to other approaches?
The call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Can I thank the member for his question, coming as he does from the great defence state of South Australia. Last Wednesday, the Albanese government announced the biggest reform to Australia's defence estate in our nation's history. Faced with the prospect of spending $2 billion over the next 25 years on defence sites that we barely use, now the defence estate will be completely focused on giving defence what it needs to do its job in defending Australia. And it has been far too long since Australian governments dealt with the defence estate. And in this respect, the Defence Estate Review pointed to a lack of political and organisational will in the past to meet these challenges. And most definitely during the 9 years of the Abbott-Turnbull-Morrison government, those opposite did absolutely nothing about it. And based on what they have said since we made the announcement last week, it is clear that if they were the government today, they would still be asleep today. But what is most astounding is that given this major defence announcement, over the last few days we have heard barely anything from the Shadow Minister for Defence. Not a press conference, no analysis, not even a bark. because when it comes to reforming defence waste, when it comes to providing for defence efficiency, when it comes to building defence capability, all of this is a long way from the Shadow Minister's thoughts. I think lately, maybe, just maybe, the Shadow Minister has been a little distracted by matters which are a bit closer to hand, matters such as that seat right there. But when it comes to the Liberal Party, that is always the issue, because they are always about their own self-interest. They are never about the national interest. We see that defence is about the security of our nation, but those opposites see defence in terms of what security it can provide to the coalition. They're very big on defence rhetoric. Shamefully and infamously, they tried to use the Australian Defence Force to raise money for the Liberal Party. But on this side of the House, we know the importance of defence policy, because when it comes to defence policy, for those opposite, it is just not core business, and it is certainly not core business for that Shadow Minister.
The call to the member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, Treasury has said the small business incentive has failed with a 23% take-up rate. Meanwhile, last year we had the highest number of small business insolvencies on record, with 41,000 collapsing under your tenure. In response to that, the Minister for Small Business mocked and ridiculed those losing their livelihoods and called them, quote, dodgy. Does the Prime Minister support the Minister for Small Business' disgraceful slur that insolvent small business owners are, quote, dodgy?
Call to the member for Chifley will leave the chamber under 94A. People cannot interject during questions, or I can accept when there is debate in the chamber, but not when there is people approaching the dispatch box, or equally when people are asking questions. We're going to continue with this respect being shown for people asking questions and answering questions. The Treasurer now has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The first point is we've learned in recent weeks to tread very carefully when it comes to those opposite verballing people's comments, and so that's the first point. The second point.
Order.
The second point is that the program that the Shadow Minister is referring to was a coalition program. That's the second point. And the third point about business insolvencies, Mr Speaker, of course we understand that businesses, especially small businesses, are under pressure. But I want to provide for this House, because those opposite are quick to, I think, use figures in a misleading way. I wanted to point out the following, Mr Speaker.
Order.
Insolvencies as a proportion of companies under the Albanese government have been the lowest for any government on record, Mr Speaker. They are lower, business insolvencies are lower than they were under Prime Minister Howard, Mr Speaker. They are lower than the 9 wasted years of Prime Ministers Abbott, Turnbull and Morrison, Mr Speaker. Insolvency rates as a proportion of businesses lower under this government than under the Howard government and the 3 governments which preceded us, Mr Speaker. They are currently almost half of the pre-COVID average. That's business insolvencies. Now, if you want to use, instead of using the percentages, Mr Speaker, they want to use nominal. They want to use the total amount of businesses. Isn't it strange that they never mention, Mr Speaker, that since the government came to office, we've averaged around 26,000 new companies each month, according to ASIC data. Now, this is more than 20% higher than the average under the former government, Mr Speaker. More businesses being created on our watch than our watch, actually more than 2.5 times what was recorded under the Howard government, Mr Speaker. And so that's an important bit of perspective, I think, when those opposite peddle partial numbers telling a partial story, Mr Speaker. Of course, we support small businesses. The Small Business Minister is an extraordinarily dedicated minister to the small businesses of this country. Because of her work and Minister Collins before her, our government is providing more than $2 billion in targeted support for small business, including in the program that was drawn up and implemented by those opposite, which is currently underperforming.
Give the call to the honourable member for Jagga Jagga.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government working with households to modernise and rebuild our energy grid after a decade of neglect?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for the question, and more importantly, I thank her for the absolutely outstanding work she does as Special Envoy on climate change and adaptation. I'm very honoured to have her as a member of our team. Now, Mr Speaker, the honourable member asked me how the Albanese government is working with households, and I can say to the House 225,531 cheaper home batteries have now been installed since the 1st of July. And when you consider, Mr Speaker, that the average size of an Australian household is 2.5 people, that's well over 500,000 Australians, more than the population of the ACT, have benefited from reducing their energy bills by up to 90%, and that is increasing by about 1,000 households a day. And 42% of those households are in rural and regional Australia, and in Queensland that figure is 55% of the cheaper home batteries that are going in are in rural and regional Australia. So this is very much a regional and rural story, as well as being in the outer suburbs. But also the whole grid. Every single Australian benefits when we flatten out demand, with more Australians storing their cheap renewable energy from the middle of the day for the night, and that helps the grid. Now, the honourable member asked me about the decade of neglect, and it is, of course, the case that we have a lot of work to do to repair that damage. Over the decade of the Liberal government, we saw 4 gigawatts of dispatchable power leave the grid and only 1 gigawatt come on. And I can tell the House, since we came to office in May 2022, we have actually added 7.7 gigawatts of dispatchable large-scale power. 7.7 gigawatts, and that's not even counting the cheaper home batteries that we've installed. And that's a lot of repair work to do after the period 2018 to 2022, when we saw the member for Hume announce a $1 billion program which delivered not one single watt, not a kilowatt, not a megawatt, a gigawatt, not a single watt to the energy grid. We saw the member for Hume be told that the Snowy 2.0 scheme was running 2 years late, and he didn't tell the Australian people, and I can tell the House it is now 70% complete, repairing the work of the member for Hume. The member for Hume knew there was a 20% increase in bills, which he hid. Is it any wonder, Mr Speaker, we saw unnamed Liberal MPs say on the weekend, I'm going to sanitise this, Mr Speaker, out of great respect for you and the House, I'm going to make the language parliamentary, because we saw a member say everything the member for Hume touches turns to custard. I've sanitised that, Mr Speaker. He was a disastrous energy minister, he was a disastrous shadow treasurer, and the definition of insanity would be to put someone with a disastrous track record into the top job, hoping things will be different. That's not us. That's his side, Mr Speaker, saying about the member for Hume. And we know the member for Hume himself said at the election campaign, you know the best indicator of future performance is past performance. Well, that's 100% right. That's why we on this side of the House wish the member for Hume all the warmest best wishes for this week, Mr Speaker. We've fully got his back.
The House comes to order. Shall hear from the honourable member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Aged Care and Seniors. The government's new single assessment scheme is failing older Australians. I'm hearing from many constituents about the long wait times for assessments, and that experienced clinicians are unable to override algorithmic decision-making. It's reported that more than 120,000 Australians are still waiting one of these automated assessments. Minister, are these once-in-a-generation reforms just robo-aged care?
Call to the Minister for Aged Care and the Minister for Seniors.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. And I acknowledge her constructive engagement around aged care issues and the compassionate support that she provides for her community. However, I respectfully disagree with the premise that she has put forward in her question. The Aged Care Act has moved from legislation to implementation. We promised to deliver generational reform to the way we care for older people, and that's exactly what we're doing. We're now focused on the practical work of this delivery, continuing to work closely with the sector and making sure that we get the settings right. And that work is being done with older Australians firmly at its centre. In December 2024, this government introduced a single streamlined assessment system, a recommendation of the Royal Commission, as well as the integrated assessment tool which was introduced on the 1st of July 2024. Instead of requiring older people to go through multiple assessments with different providers, we've moved to a simpler system that is more streamlined, easier and more responsive as people's needs change. Thanks to this approach, the number of outstanding assessments has been reducing in recent months. Between the April-June quarter and the July-September quarter of 2025, median wait times for home support assessments dropped by 7 days. In that same time period, median comprehensive assessment wait times dropped 8 days, with the median wait time just 24 days from request to completion of assessments in the July-September quarter. The integrated assessment tool is used by an aged care needs assessor to assess an older person's wellbeing, capturing a comprehensive profile of an older person's needs and ensuring accuracy and consistency in decision-making. A classification algorithm runs after the assessor completes the IAT with the older person, determining an older person's ongoing CHSP or support at home classification. Can I assure the member that assessors still play a critical role in achieving high-quality assessment outcomes by using their clinical judgment and strong communication and engagement skills to complete the IAT during the assessment? Let me be clear. The IAT classification algorithm does not replace assessor input and relies on assessors documenting their advice in the IAT first. Feedback from older Australians is absolutely critical to this process. The department will continue to monitor the operation of the algorithm and we intend to refine it on a regular basis. Mr Speaker, this is a steady, responsible delivery, listening, getting the details right and keeping our focus on better outcomes for older Australians.
Order. The member for Hume is just going to cease interjecting so we can order. The member for Hume, the member for Lyon were just too animated during those answers. We're just going to make sure everyone is listening, showing respect, so we can now hear from the member for Paterson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture. How is the Albanese Labor government rebuilding our trading relationships to deliver more opportunities for Australian farmers and producers? How does this compare to other approaches, and why are strong relationships key for our farmers and our regional communities?
Give a call to the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I do want to thank our terrific member for Paterson, as she is chair of the House Committee on Agriculture and she's done a mountain of work about food security and the importance of farmers in our region. So I do want to thank her, and she of course knows how important our trade outcomes are for farmers and regional communities. While those opposite, of course, have remained focused on themselves for months, we've been focused on delivering more opportunities for our farmers and our producers to export their world-class products, Mr Speaker. This is delivering record success for our farmers and for our producers, with ABARES predicting agricultural exports will reach over $83 billion this financial year. Over $83 billion this financial year from our farmers. And this is testament to the hard work and resilience of our farmers, backed of course by our government's careful and considered work to diversify trade and restore Australia's standing in the world. Because we know that more trade is good for our farmers, good for regional jobs and good for local economies. Since coming to government, we've now delivered 256 market access achievements and improvements for agriculture products. We now reach around 190 countries, the most diversified our agricultural trade has ever been, Mr Speaker. We've secured, of course, the removal of $80 billion worth of trade impediments from our largest trading partner. We've delivered Australia's first free trade agreement with the Middle East, which slashed around $50 million a year in tariffs on Australian agriculture and food exports. This agreement with the UAE has now seen $67 million worth of Aussie beef exported in just the first 2 months. $67 million of great Aussie beef in just 2 months. We've secured new market access for Australian blueberries to Vietnam, trade worth around $22 million. We've improved access for wheat exports to Indonesia. This is a market worth $1.5 billion. And it took a Labor government to secure these market access improvements for our farmers and our producers, because we understand, of course, that relationships require stability, consistency and trust. But, Mr Speaker, if you want a lesson on how not to manage a relationship, you've just got to look at the shambles opposite. The Liberals and the Nationals splitting twice in a mere 2 months. If they can't manage their own internal relationships in opposition, let alone Australia's international relationships during government, how are they fit to govern again, Mr Speaker? Our farmers and our producers deserve so much better, which is why, of course, on this side of the House we'll continue securing more trade opportunities for our farmers, while those opposite on that side of the House are focused their attention on who's on the menu. We're getting on with what's on the menu, and the Albanese Labor government will continue to support our farmers.
Call to the honourable member for McKellar.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Overnight, Israel approved new measures that attempt to legalise settlement expansion and land confiscation in the occupied West Bank. Given that Australia has recognised the State of Palestine, that these settlements are illegal under international law and that Australia has used targeted sanctions elsewhere, will the Prime Minister sanction Israeli institutions and officials linked to the settlement expansion and strongly reiterate Australia's commitment to the two-state solution? Thank you.
Call to the Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the member for her question. And in doing so, I note the timing of the question. The government has in place sanctions in respect of Israel, which have been announced and well publicised. But underpinning that has fundamentally been a position which has been held by this government, which is consistent with governments of the past from both political parties of supporting a two-state solution. A two-state solution which on the one hand provides for the legitimate aspiration of the Palestinian people to have statehood, but which on the other hand also provides for the people of Israel to be able to live with security. And that continues to be the position that our government has held. And in the face of the very complex situation which has evidently played out in the Middle East, every step that we have taken as a government has been underpinned by that very clear position. Now, in saying that, it is also important for me to acknowledge on this day that we have in this country the head of state of one of those states, the State of Israel. And his visit to our country is an important visit. At the invitation of both the Prime Minister and the Governor-General, it's an important visit on its own terms in respect of the bilateral relationship between Australia and Israel. But obviously, in the context of the tragedy of the Bondi massacre, his presence in Australia today is very significant for our nation and particularly for our nation's Jewish community. And in that respect, the President of Israel is here today and during this week as an honoured and welcomed guest. And he is so utterly consistent with the position that this government holds in supporting a two-state solution.
Call to the honourable member for Bean.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and Defence Personnel. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to grow the Australian Defence Force's capabilities in new domains, and why is this important?
Call to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and the Minister for Defence Personnel.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his important question. Many think about the ADF in terms of land, air and sea, but our capabilities across space and cyber are becoming increasingly important. And so I was proud today to be able to launch 2 new direct recruitment roles into the Australian Defence Force, our Space Operator Officers and our Space Operator Specialist roles. These are new direct recruitment roles into our Defence Force. And it means for those that are gravitating towards a career in defence, they will now be able to consider a career in space. A job that would be out of this world for those of us when we were in school now becomes something that is attainable to them. And this means that we will be having people join our Defence Force being able to perform vitally important roles across satellite communication, missile detection, intelligence, reconnaissance, weather and environmental observation, and of course being able to be aware and to observe what's going on in the important domain of space. We always talk about being aware of those other domains and what may be confronting our country during these most difficult of geostrategic circumstances, and it's important that we are able to do that in the space domain as well. And we do this in a context where we are growing our Defence Force with more than 300 different roles available for direct recruitment into our Defence Force now. This is an incredibly important thing as we seek to grow our Defence Force more broadly, because when we came into government, the Defence Force was not growing, it was shrinking. We have gone around delivering by increasing our recruitment to the Defence Force, and last financial year we saw the largest recruitment number in 15 years. And importantly now, we also see that our separation rate is at historic lows. That means, unlike when those opposite were in government, under the Albanese government, we are growing our Defence Force, we're improving our capability across land, sea, air and, importantly now, space and cyber as well. We are concentrating on delivery for our national security in government, while those opposite are only focused on division and themselves.
Call to the honourable member for Cook.
My question is to the Treasurer. The RBA Governor confirmed what the Treasurer would not, that government spending contributes to pressure on interest rates. Confirming what we all already knew, the Governor said, quote, "That's logical, it's mathematical, that's what happens." Given economists, former RBA board members and now the RBA Governor herself all acknowledge government spending contributes to inflation and the latest interest rate rise, why can't the Treasurer?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Once again, dishonestly conflating 2 different things. The idea... Wasn't it deliberate was the problem?
Order. The manager on a point of order.
Again, the Treasurer is imputing a motive to a member asking a simple question, and it's out of order for him to make that suggestion.
Well, I listened carefully. It's a different category from the earlier one, where he accused the member of deliberately doing something. It's his opinion that he is asserting at the moment, and that's why I'm ruling that in order. All right. Well, I can fix this pretty easily by getting the Treasurer just to change that wording to make sure it complies. But order, and that's why I'm agreeing with the manager. So when I'm on your side, make sure you listen carefully. So we'll fix this, and then we can move on. The Treasurer.
Mr Speaker, the more divided they get, the more desperate they get. The point that I'm making is those opposite have tried to conflate 2 very different things. The idea that public demand is part of the calculation of aggregate demand is not contested by anyone, Mr Speaker, and that's what they're pretending that we are contesting. We are not. The question isn't whether public demand is part of aggregate demand. It's whether public demand was responsible for the bigger-than-expected tick-up at the end of last year, and plainly it wasn't, Mr Speaker. Now, those opposite should stop verballing the Governor of the Reserve Bank and look at what the Governor actually said. The Governor herself said on Friday that she was surprised how quickly public demand retreated and how much private demand accelerated. That's the same factual point that they made in the statement on Tuesday, and the same factual point that I have been making during the course of last week, yesterday on Insiders, and this week as well. In fact, Mr Speaker, the budget has improved in both updates last year, quite significantly in the December update, and also a budget improvement in March as well, Mr Speaker. Now, I remind the member again, as I had to remind the Shadow Treasurer, by his own logic, there would be more inflation and higher interest rates if they'd won the election and implemented the member for Hume's policy for higher deficits this year and next year, at the same time as he wanted to increase income taxes on all 14 million Australian taxpayers, Mr Speaker. Now, in a lot of organisations, that would get you marked down. In that one, it gets him promoted, Mr Speaker. It gets him promoted. Now, the same people who say now that inflation and rates are determined primarily by budgets weren't saying that last year when inflation was falling and rates were cut 3 times, Mr Speaker. They should stop conflating two very different things. I don't expect much better from the member for Fairfax, but we should expect better from the member up the back.
Call to the honourable member for Brisbane.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting Australians into home ownership? What other approaches has the government been asked to consider?
Call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Cities.
Thank you, Speaker, and I am absolutely thrilled to get this question from the member for Brisbane. Just recently, we ticked over 2,000 of her constituents who have gotten into their first home because of her advocacy and our government's backing. Speaker, 2,000 people in her community and many more to come. Now, Speaker, we've got a housing challenge affecting our country that's been cooking for 40 years. For 40 years, we have not been building enough homes, and all of the pain that Australians are in today with relation to housing really comes back to that problem, whether it's house prices rising too quickly, rents going up too fast, or that really visible effect that all of us see in our communities, that rising population of people who do not have a stable roof over their head. Now, Speaker, these problems are serious enough, but one of the things that is so concerning to our government is the fact that this is not a burden being fairly shared by Australians. What we see is that, without question, it is younger Australians and it is Australians on low incomes who are bearing the brunt of this. Now, Speaker, I know that you talk to a lot of young people around the country, and hopefully all of us as representatives are speaking to our younger constituents. And so you will hear them talk about the fact that for so many of them, housing is the defining problem in their lives.
The minister will pause. The member for Barker has been completely interjecting right throughout question time. He's come alive, so he's now going to leave the chamber under 94A. Simply unacceptable to be interjecting non-stop in every single answer.
Thank you so much, Speaker.
The Minister in continuation.
Thank you so much, Speaker. So this is a problem that is very heavily falling on the younger people of this country, and the numbers don't lie, Speaker. A lower-income young Australian is about half as likely to own their own home today as in the year that I was born. Now, Speaker, that is why our government has such a bold and ambitious agenda to address the housing situation for young people around our country. Now, Speaker, the 5% deposit program that is so offensive to those opposite is something that has now helped 220,000 Australians into their first home on our watch, because we have a pretty simple belief, Speaker, and that is we believe that ordinary Australians should get the chance to get into their own home, and we are right here to back them in. Now, Speaker, the member asked me about alternative approaches, and what a pity it is that those opposite, once a serious political force in this country, have nothing sensible to say about one of the biggest challenges that faces our country. Now, we had the Shadow Minister for Housing give an interview last week, and he was asked about the Coalition's policy, and this is what he said, Speaker. I'm quoting him directly. He said, "We've been too busy talking about the internals of the Liberal Party to do any work." I did not make that up, Speaker. Those were his exact words. And I present that to the House Speaker because it is very important for the Australian people to understand that the absolutely outrageous disunity and dysfunction that exists on the other side of the parliament actually has a cost for Australians. This country has got some really significant issues. We need a functional opposition to actually debate and discuss these with us. Now, Speaker, they come to parliament each fortnight and spend all their time talking about themselves. Our focus is on the Australian people who sent us there and the things that we can do to make their lives better.
Call to the honourable member for Riverina.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. In the lead-up to the 2022 election, the Prime Minister repeatedly promised a $275 reduction in household energy bills, and I quote, "I don't know, I know, because we have done the modelling." Without mentioning home batteries, will the Minister finally admit the Prime Minister was wrong, the modelling was wrong, and Australian families are paying the price every day for this government's abject failure to deliver on its promise?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I understand the honourable gentleman doesn't want me to mention the 2,390 households in his electorate that have received a cheaper home battery, but I feel obliged. I feel obliged to speak on their behalf, Mr Speaker, to defend their right for a cheaper home battery that those opposite oppose. I mean, those opposite talking a lot about spending cuts at the moment. Well, they cut the cheaper home battery policy. That's what Australians would want to know before even more Australians get a chance to access a cheaper home battery. Now, the Prime Minister's also made the point after the election that we've seen so many Australians reduce their bills permanently after the 2025 election. Seen so many Australians, 225,000 Australian households, and times 2.5 in terms of numbers of people, reduce their bills permanently, in many cases to zero, in many cases get a rebate. We think that's a good thing. Those opposite aren't too impressed with that, Mr Speaker. That's the difference between the two sides of the House. Now, in relation to energy prices, as I said in my previous answer, the Australian people knew in 2025 what progress we'd made, what efforts we'd made, what obstacles we'd had to overcome, and they looked at the two sides' policies, they looked at the records, and they asked us to serve a second term in office, Mr Speaker, one that we are humbled and honoured to receive.
Order.
And the member for Fairfax to take his fair share of the credit for that, Mr Speaker, to give due credit. The architect of the opposition's nuclear policy, we're very grateful to him. We're very grateful for the nuclear $600 billion policy which he engineered, which he sold to the Australian people, and which the Australian people casted a verdict on.
The Minister has again concluded his answer. Order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the honourable member for Aston.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to cut student debt and to make it cheaper and quicker to get the skills Australians need? And why is unity so important in delivering for Australians?
Call to the Minister for Education.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank my friend, the legendary member for Aston, for her question. Mr Speaker, school's back and university will be back very soon too, and this year more Australians will start a university degree than ever before. And that's good news because we need more teachers, we need more nurses, we need more doctors, we need more scientists, we need more engineers and lots more. In the years ahead, more jobs are going to require more skills, the sort of skills that you get at TAFE or at university. And that's why we're funding free TAFE and that's why we're funding more spots at university. Mr Speaker, we also want to make it easier and faster and cheaper to get those skills. And that's why we've cut student debt by 20%. The biggest cut to student debt in Australian history, taking a massive weight off the shoulders of 3 million young Australians. The average student debt has been cut by $5,500. We're not just doing that, we're also cutting the amount of money that you have to repay of that debt every year. For example, if you're on $70,000 a year, we're cutting the amount that you have to repay every year by $1,300. Now, that's real cost of living help. It means an extra $1,300 in your pocket rather than the government's. And these aren't the only things that we're doing. I told the House last year that the University of Canberra has cut the length of 6 university degrees by 12 months and cut the cost of those degrees by an average of $6,000 if you've done a TAFE course in the same area. I can advise the House that Western Sydney University has just announced the same sort of thing. If you've got a TAFE qualification in nursing or construction or IT or a range of other areas, they'll cut the length of your degree by a year and cut the cost of that degree by up to $18,000. And, Mr Speaker, that's the sort of thing that I want to see more of this year. And I know Australians want to see more of that too. A real partnership, a genuine coalition between TAFE and university. A tailor-made coalition that stands for something and that gets things done, that will help to make sure that your degree is shorter and cheaper and gets you the skills that you need. That's the sort of thing that Australians want, a coalition that's focused on them. And, Mr Speaker, by gosh, surely it's not too much to ask.
Give the call to the member. Order. Order. Give the call to the member for Casey.
My question is to the Treasurer. Last week, the RBA Governor confirmed that government spending is part of aggregate demand and, quote, contributing to inflationary pressures, and that's why we've decided to raise interest rates. Will the Treasurer now finally accept that his spending has contributed to inflationary pressures and the interest rate rise, or is the independent RBA Governor wrong?
Order. Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I answered this question when the member for Cook asked it a moment ago. And the member for Casey is making the same mistake that the member for Cook made and the member for Fairfax made as well, and that is to conflate two very different things. Now, if the member for Casey was listening a moment ago in my answer to the member for Cook, he would have heard me say that public is part of aggregate demand is not contested by anyone. The question is whether the question is whether public spending is responsible for the higher than expected tick up in inflation towards the end of last year. And here I refer the honourable member, as I referred the other member and the one up the front for the time being, that this is what the Governor of the Reserve Bank actually said, Mr Speaker. Governor of the Reserve Bank, quoting, "Public demand's contribution has declined and we were surprised in the first half of 2025 that it declined as much as it did. We were surprised in the latter half of 2025 that private demand on the upside, they are facts." Mr Speaker, they made a similar point in the media release that they put out on the Tuesday. Governor Bullock made that point a number of different ways on Friday as well. What those opposite are desperately trying to do is to verbal the Reserve Bank Governor in an attempt to drag her, I think, in an unedifying way into a political contest, because they're desperate to distract from the fact that they are hopelessly divided. It is a shambolic opposition, and the more divided they are, the more desperate they become in trying to verbal the Reserve Bank Governor. It's possible to understand, as I do, as the Reserve Bank Governor does, that public demand is part of aggregate demand, and also to acknowledge again, as I have and as the Governor of the Reserve Bank has, that the tick-up in inflation towards the end of last year, which was unwelcome and led to the interest rate decision last week, was primarily because of the uptick in private demand that the governor has referenced herself on a number of occasions. And so I would encourage those opposite to be more respectful of the governor, to quote her accurately. I mean, last week the opposition leader tried to drag the Treasury Secretary into it, and now they're trying to drag the Reserve Bank governor into it as well, Mr Speaker, and they should understand that they are referring to two very different things. I think that they are deliberately conflating them to try and cover up for the fact those opposite are a three-ring circus. This government won't be distracted by them.
Give a call to the honourable member for Whitlam.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. How is the Albanese Labor government's social media age restriction helping to protect young people online? What has been the response?
Call to the Minister for Communications and the Minister for Sport.
I thank the member for Whitlam for her question. The Albanese government is proudly leading the world in our mission to protect our kids from the persuasive and pervasive pull of social media. In the wake of 4.7 million accounts being deactivated, removed or restricted in the first week of our social media laws, leaders from across the globe are now following in Australia's footsteps. Because the battle to protect young people online transcends the boundaries of any country or continent. In the lead-up to and after 10 December, I've met with leaders from across the globe and the political spectrum who are inspired and encouraged by Australia's courage and conviction to take on big tech. In recent days, Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has committed to protecting Spanish children from the digital Wild West by delaying access to social media until the age of 16 years old. Joining Australia in our mission, he recognised that children are being exposed to a space they were never meant to navigate alone. We will no longer accept that. We will protect them. President Emmanuel Macron said consensus was being shaped on the need to protect future generations, with French lawmakers passing a bill delaying access to social media until the age of 15. Prime Minister Keir Starmer is looking closely at Australia's social media law, and I look forward to meeting with the British Secretary of State Liz Kendall to share our experiences and our success. Our friends across the ditch, Prime Minister Christopher Luxon, is deeply supportive of delaying access to social media until the age of 16, and they are preparing to introduce their own laws. Denmark is standing up to the social media giants with their own minimum age laws, citing that the cell phone and social media are robbing our children of their childhood. Norway is putting a stop to tech companies that are pitted against small children's brains, enforcing a minimum age of 15. And the list continues with Malaysia, the Czech Republic, Romania and Egypt. And I expect other countries will now follow as Australia's waves ripple across the globe. As American social psychologist Professor Jonathan Haidt said, Australia's law is by far the most important single piece of legislation ever enacted on planet Earth to protect children in the internet age. We stare down everybody who said it couldn't be done, some of the most powerful and rich companies in the world and their supporters, and now Australian parents can be confident their kids can have their childhood back. The world is looking to Australia and the action that we are taking. We will not back down from this fight, and we are proud to be leading the world in making the digital world safer for our kids.
Order. I'm just asking members on my left to show some restraint, particularly on the topic that we're discussing in the parliament. Look, the manager, can you just control yourself? I want to bring the House back to order. And when you stop, we will show the member for Ryan respect. We'll try hard to show respect. Give the call to the honourable member for Ryan.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Transport Minister. CommBank, CSL and Qantas were all privatised by Labor, and now you're set to follow those footsteps and let Air Services Australia sell off billions in firefighting assets, though Air Services will lease these back anyway. Why let Air Services sell out our hard-working aviation firefighters and risk aviation safety with an accounting trick that will cost more in the long term?
Call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much. Well, it is true that our aviation assets are ageing. At our federally leased airports, we have firefighting terminals that are quite old, as well as a fleet of fire trucks. It's estimated it's about $8 billion worth of assets that need replacing. The government has made no decisions about how it is going to fund the replacement of those assets. Air Services has requested to explore whether there is opportunities for Australian super funds to invest in these assets, and I have suggested that that can continue, but the government has made no decisions about this. But I want to make sure that our firefighters, wherever they are, but particularly the ones that I have responsibility at Air Services, continue to be government employees always, but that they also have the best possible equipment to fight fires at airports. I want to make sure that that is the case, but the government has made no decisions about this matter at all.
Call to the honourable member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. How is the Albanese Labor government focused on delivering key rail projects across the country? Why is delivery rather than division so important in the delivery of infrastructure projects?
Call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thanks very much, and can I thank the member for Boothby for her question. Last month we reached an exciting milestone for her constituents with Adelaide's Glenelg line reopening over the Australia Day long weekend. In partnership with the Malinowskis Labor government, we removed 3 level crossings, replacing them with terrific new bridges. And that is a big safety upgrade and will also mean faster journeys for drivers and smoother commutes for people catching these trams. Adelaide, of course, isn't the only place where we're making tracks on our infrastructure investment. Last month, we saw the first new tracks being laid in the Canberra CBD, a big milestone on this city's city-shaping project and a great example of the progress that we're making. Stage 2A will deliver 3 new stops and pave the way for the network to be extended south of the lake. And of course, in the regions, we're getting the basics right on Inland Rail, which under the Nationals was a train to nowhere. When the Nationals held this portfolio and started Inland Rail, they set off on a half-baked plan with no idea how they were beginning to bring it to a close. Now, that might sound a bit familiar. We've just seen a bit like when they blew up the coalition and spent 17 days basically bickering with each other and not having a plan as to how to get out of it. They've had no plan for a freight terminus in Victoria, and we had to come in and fix that mess. And I'm happy to report that just late last year, with the member for McEwen, I turned the first sod on the Beveridge Intermodal, which will be the Victorian terminus for double-stacked freight trains. That means that double-stacked freight trains will be able to travel from Melbourne all the way to Perth via Parkes. Inland Rail is just another example of where the Nationals have started something without thinking through the details. Of course, it is Labor now, with 24 regional seats, that really is the party of the bush, and we are focused on delivery. While the newly reformed coalition rail against each other on the airwaves, we're getting on with building the infrastructure that Australia needs. Australia infrastructure is on track, while the coalition remains continually off the rails.
Order. Order. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Keep going if you like.
Order.
I ask that further questions be placed on the notice page.